Friends, if you do not have the opportunity, time, desire, energy, to read Mark Twain's novel The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, watch this video. You will know about the adventures of the ordinary boy and his friends. The author wrote a novel in 1884. This is a continuation of the novel The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Events take place in America before the Civil War. Those still when there was slavery. And the author himself was opposed to slavery. In his book, words such as nigger, nigga. In 2011, in the United States and new editions, these words were replaced by politically correct ones. Friends. Who are Huckleberry Finn and why he became rich are described in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Therefore you can first see the retelling of the novel. The story is in the first person. Therefore, I will also tell as if this story happened to me. I, as before, live with the widow Douglas. She is still trying to make me a raised boy. But I really do not like it. Mrs. Douglas came to live her sister Miss Watson. So she began to teach me to read. One night Tom came over me. We took a few more friends with us. All together they boarded the boat and swam to the cave where Tom once got lost. He said that he wanted to create his own band of robbers. To enter it, you need to say an oath and sign in blood. Everyone agreed. Tom read the oath. In a nutshell, always protect each other and keep the secret of the gang. And what will you do? The guys asked Tom. Nothing special, rob, kill. All knowledge of the gangs and robbers Tom read in the books. I have not seen my father for more than a year. He was a drunkard and often beat me, because when a body was found in the Mississippi River that looked like my father, I was not upset, even delighted. A month has passed. The gang did not rob anyone, did not kill anyone. Therefore, I came out of it. And the other guys too. It took another 3 to 4 months. Winter came. I went to school. Few learned to count and write. Slowly used to school. Once I saw traces in the snow. They descended from the quarry, approached our fence, and then went off somewhere. The most interesting thing is that the heel was a cross, which drives away the evil force. I knew that my father had such a heel. And I knew perfectly well that my father could take all my money to drink it. Then I ran to Judge Thatcher and said that I didn't need all my money. And he gave them to him. I signed some paper, and the judge gave me $1. Then I went to the Negro Miss Watson, whose name was Jim. He knew how to tell fortunes. I needed to know what my father was going to do. Jim bewitched any nonsense, like many fortune tellers. But I believed it. He said that his father still does not know what he will do. That I need to beware of the water and that, in the end, they will hang me. When I came to my room in the evening, my father was sitting in it. Father was about 50. I realized that he climbed into the room through the window. Well, you and dressed up. Major become, asked the father. They say that you know how to read and write. Do you think now he's smarter than me? You will not go to school anymore. All your relatives were illiterate. And you should be so. I heard you got some money. So, tomorrow, that you brought me. He took $1 from me and went to buy his whiskey. The next day, he got drunk and went to the judge for my money. Of course, he received nothing. Said he would sue. Then Mrs. Douglas and Judge Thatcher themselves went to court to deprive my father of my parental rights to me. and assign one of them to me as a guardian. But the judge was a newcomer in our area. He did not know my father. Therefore, he could not simply deprive him of his fatherhood. My father got drunk with joy again, rough house in the city. Then the new judge wanted to make him a man. He invited him to live in his house, washed him, gave him new clothes, put him at his table. And then he started talking about the dangers of alcoholism. My father shed a tear, agreed with everything. He promised the judge that he would never drink again, that he had corrected himself and would now be a real person. The judge and his wife already shed tears. And at night my father wanted to drink. He got out of the window and in the city exchanged his new clothes for drinks. In the morning he got drunk on the roof, fell from it, broke his left arm. The judge understood that only the grave would fix it. My father caught me and beat me for going to school. I did it on purpose, to spite it. So that he did not beat me, I gave him $2 to $3. My father got drunk, he was put in jail, then released. He liked such a life. And once in the spring, he kidnapped me and took me by boat up the river. There was some sort of hut in the wilderness itself. I could not escape from there. We went hunting together, fished, and lived there. When he needed a drink, he locked me up, took the fish and exchanged it in the city for a drink. He came back, got drunk and beat me. If it were not for this, I would even like it in the forest. No school, no one bothers. So 2 months have passed. My father started beating me more often. Once, he locked me up and left for 3 days, so I could die. I realized that we must somehow run away. By the way, I didn't want to go back to Douglas's widow either. Decided to go anywhere. When my father got drunk, he began to talk about how bad our government is. That it wants to take his son away from him, that he does not give him his money, and that there are states where blacks is allowed to vote. Yes, you need to get out of this country. He fell asleep, and when he woke up, he lost his mind, chasing me with a knife, shouting that I was the angel of death who came for him. He ran until he was tired, and then he fell asleep again. In the morning I went to the river to check the fish, saw a floating boat. There was nobody in it. Then I swam to the boat and hid it. The boat was my salvation. When my father next sailed into the city, I ran away. I saw a log in the wall and was able to crawl through the hole. But I did not run away right away. I organized something. First, all the most valuable things, food, weapons, carried in boat. Then I took an axe and chopped the front door. I killed a wild pig in the forest, cut it in the house so that there was a lot of blood. Put many stones in a bag and pulled this bag to the river. I cut off a shred of my hair and glued it to the axe. There was an illusion that there was a murder. Sorry, Tom Sawyer didn't see it. In my boat, I fell asleep. I woke up at night. It was heard as the father, for some reason sober, floats to the hut. And after that I swam down the river to the already familiar uninhabited island of Jackson. It was there that I decided to live. I woke up late, at 8 o'clock. I heard a ship sailing along the river. They were looking for me, or rather my dead body. On the boat, I saw my friend Tom. I lived on the island. I liked everything. So it took 3 days. I took a gun and went wandering around the island, studying it. And then I stumbled upon someone's fire. I immediately ran away from there. Damn it. I'm not alone here. Bad, I thought. But I need to know who else lives here. At night I took a gun and went in search. Someone was lying by the fire. It was Jim, Miss Watson's slave. "Hi, Jim," I cried happily. "And he will be scared, don't touch me. I never offended the dead. Go back to the river, I was friends with you. Easy, Jim. I'm not dead." And I told everything. Jim was hungry. He has been on the island since the day they killed me. I fed him. And then I told how I faked my murder. Jim ran away. The runaway slave is very bad. Jim overheard his mistress, Miss Watson. She was going to sell him to the South for $800. It is today about $20,000. Jim did not wait for the sale and ran away. On a high hill we found a spacious cave. We dragged all our things there in case of rain. At night a heavy downpour began. 10 days the water in the river rose and eventually overflowed the banks. Once we saw a houseboat, double-decker, waiting for dawn. We looked inside. There lay the corpse of a man. Jim examined him. He was naked, shot from behind. 2 to 3 days ago. Jim told me not to look at the corpse. The walls were covered in bad words. A lot of things were useful in this house. We carried these things into the boat. The clothes of the deceased were $8 silver. Jim did not want to talk about the murdered, but I wanted to. He was afraid the ghost would haunt us. On Friday in a cave, I saw a rattlesnake and killed it. Put it on Jim's blanket, for a laugh. That's just to the dead snake crawled her friend and bit Jim for the heel. He walked barefoot. It was not fun at all. I didn't tell Jim that this was my fault. His leg is swollen. 4 days he was feverish, and then the tumor began to subside. Jim recovered. The river returned to its banks again. I wanted to visit the city to find out the news. Jim advised to wear women's clothes so that they would not recognize me. Okay, a good idea. Everything worked out. It was necessary only to follow the habit of not putting hands in pockets. I sailed by boat to the city. I went to the house where no one had lived before. There were some new inhabitants. The door was opened to me by a woman of 40. She invited to enter. Talked about my murder. At first my father was suspected of the murder, and then the runaway slave Jim. He fled the very night that Huck was killed, the woman said. And for him promised a reward of $300. And for the father of Huck $200. He also ran away. It saved him from lynching. A woman said she saw smoke on Jackson Island, and she thinks the black is hiding there. Therefore her husband and neighbor will go at night and check whether this is so. The woman looked at me strangely. She guessed that I was not a girl. Then I had to tell her the fictional story that I was an apprentice who had escaped from the evil master. Clear. You don't show up in your dress to women. Only men you can fool. Got it? Got it. Thanks. She fed me, and then we said goodbye. I quickly returned to the island. I woke Jim and said that we need to get ready urgently for us chase. After an hour and a half, we boarded a raft and swam down the river. On a raft, Jim built a hut. For several days we calmly drifted along. We were good. Every evening I bought food in some city or village. And one night during a thunderstorm, we saw a steamer that crashed against a rock. I was sure that there was no one on the ship in such and such weather, because persuaded Jim to climb on him. On the ship were gangster disassembly. One dude tied up lying on the floor. Above him with a revolver stood two. They did not see us. Those two wanted to kill the line guy. I went back to Jim. "Get out of here." "Our raft swam away," said Jim. "Damn," I think. "Stay on the steamer with the bandits?" "Of course not." Then I went to look for a boat bandits. And found. There were all sorts of things. Jim and I got into it. Cut the rope and floated. I thought that probably the gangsters would hurt not to find their boat. You will need to get off in the near town and talk about them. Let them find them and hang them like normal people. Soon we saw our raft. We put all the stuff from the boat on him. Jim stayed, and I sailed on to find people and report the broken ship. I saw the ferryman. He swam there. And I, to Jim. We hid the raft, flooded the boat and went to bed. In the morning we looked at the gangster stuff. There were many useful things. Even books. I began to read something to Jim. But he was so stupid, he understood nothing. I spat on this case, I didn't read anything else. We planned to get to the city of Cairo on the border of Illinois. Then on the boat up the Ohio River. And we are in free states where there is no slavery. That was our plan. One night in the fog we got lost. All night Jim and I were looking for each other. And when I found him, Jim slept on a raft. I was joking at him. I said that no one was lost. Like, he dreamed it all. It can't be, can Jim? Can. He then realized that I had deceived him as a child. He was offended. I never made a joke about him again. Jim waited for the city to appear. After all, then he will become a free man. And I was disgusting at heart. After all, I helped escape another property, which belonged to Miss Watson. Jim made plans for the future. He wanted to earn money and buy his wife and then his children out of slavery. And if the owners suddenly do not want to sell them, he will steal them. I already thought to pass it to the authorities. But he was so grateful to me that I understood, I can't betray Jim. I went down the river to find out how far Cairo was. I met two men. They were looking for 5 escaped slaves. I told them that I needed their help, to delay the raft. "Why are you looking for help, not your father?" they asked. "You know, is he sick with smallpox?" "So, boy, goodbye. We do not want to get sick. Here, take the money," and they gave $40, and all the best to you. Where was Cairo? We did not know. Once, even on Jackson Island, I picked up snakeskin. So Jim said that this is a very bad omen. Now we have associated any trouble that happened to us with that snakeskin. One night our raft rammed the ship. After all, we only moved at night in order not to attract attention. The steamer did not see us and passed through the center of the raft. Jim and I jumped into the river. The steamer sailed on, and Jim and I lost each other. I swam to shore and got out. In the darkness, I went somewhere unknown and came across someone's house. "Who's there?" they asked me. "My name is George Jackson," I replied. I fell overboard from the steamer. The people living in the house were somehow frightened. They were obviously afraid of someone. Therefore they let me out with great caution and immediately searched. A woman told her servants to take care of me. And the son Back, who was the same age as me, ordered me to bring dry clothes. I was fed. I told them a fictional story about my family. And when in the morning I woke up in Buck's room, I forgot the name I had introduced myself. "Buck, I am sure that you will not be able to write my name." "I can." And he wrote. Now I remembered my name. It was the Grangerford family. Bob was a big brother, middle was Tom, the youngest was Buck. There were also two sisters. One sister Emmeline died. Once there were three more sons, killed. The master of the colonel had many farms and about 100 slaves. In these places lived another aristocratic family, Shepherdsons. Once, Buck and I walked in the woods, and he shouted to me that I would rather run away. Some guy appeared. He was from Shepherdsons. Buck shot him, he shot him. Both remained alive. In general, the Grangerfords and Shepherdsons feuded among themselves. That's why they shot at each other. It all started about 30 years ago. There was a dispute in court between them. The one who lost the argument shot the one who won the argument. Then the revenge began, and it still lasts. And what was the argument about? I asked. I do not know. Who was the first to shoot someone? I don't know either. One afternoon, Miss Sophia, Buck's sister, called me. She asked me to go to church and bring her the gospel, which she forgot. Just do not tell anyone about it. I went to church and found a book there. And inside was a note, at 2:30. I took the book to Miss Sophia. The girl was very pleased to read the message. What is written there? I asked. Do you know how to read? Not. Printed letters only. Then nothing special. Thanks. Do not tell anybody. Bye. Okay. The owners of the house gave me a servant, Jack Negro. He took me to the swamp where I met Jim. He was glad to see me to tears. Jim said that after the accident he was swimming behind me, but far from me. He thought that he could catch up on the ground. But I went into the house. And the next day, Jim found the local slaves. They showed him a place where the dogs would not find him, carried food and told him how I was doing. And Jim, meanwhile, was engaged in repairing our raft, which washed ashore. I woke up in the morning. And around silence. In the house no one. Negro Jack said that at night Miss Sophia escaped to marry one of Shepherdson's. The men took the guns, mounted the horses and rode after the fugitives. There will be meat, said Jack. I wondered what would happen next. I went to the river, climbed a tall tree and watched. Grangerfords and Shepherdsons fired at each other. Buck walked over to my tree. He said that his father and two of his brothers were killed. 2 or 3 Shepherdsons were also killed. But Miss Sophia and her fiancé managed to get over to the other side, and were safe. Buck and his cousin were wounded. I was sitting in a tree before it got dark. I was afraid to get off. By the river, I found 2 corpses, Buck and his cousin. Thought it was my fault. After all, I did not tell the colonel about that note, so it would be possible to avoid the tragedy. I thought that I would not return to this house. Ran to the swamp to Jim. He was at the river and preparing to sail. Because he thought that in this skirmish they killed me. How happy we were both, glad to get out of there as soon as possible. For several days we sailed without incident. At night they swam, during the day they rested. One morning, before dawn, I found an empty boat. I went ashore. I see, 2 men are running. They run to me. They said that chasing them, although they did not do anything. Well, yes. We boarded the boat and swam to the island where Jim was waiting for me. One of the tramps was about 70, an old man. The other is about 30. It turned out that they did not even know each other. Both were crooks. After their next scams, they were followed by a chase. The young guy said that he was a duke by birth, Bridgewater. But life is such that it is what it is. He asked to be called your lordship, my lord, or your mercy. Then the old man said that not only that evil fate, after all, he is also of noble blood. He is a Dauphin, i.e. heir to the throne. Missing son of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, King of France. I am the rightful King of France, said the old man. He asked to call him your majesty. At the table serve food to him first and not sit down until he allows. Jim and I talked this way, to the duke and to the king. The duke, of course, resented the king, but then the old man told him that so that he would not worry, everything would be fine. Very soon, I guessed that these vagrants were ordinary crooks, but did not talk about it. Why quarrel with people on the same raft? They want to be kings, you are welcome. I didn't even tell Jim about this. Vagrants asked why we swim at night, not during the day. Could Jim be a runaway slave? What are you guys? Why would we then sail to the south? Here it is necessary to clarify, slavery was in the south of the USA, but not in the north. The Mississippi River flows to the south. Therefore, on a raft they moved downstream. Tramps agreed. But still, I had to come up with another legend for them. And with this, I had no difficulties. In general, Jim is my Negro, and in the afternoon everyone swim up to us and think that he is fluent. And they want to take it from me. The Duke and the King took our mattresses, which we used to sleep on. The first city where the King made money was Polkville. At a meeting of believers in the city, he told his story of a sinner and asked his brothers to throw off money for him. That he sailed to the Indian Ocean and converted pirates to Christians. For the first day, the king earned $87. The Duke sold the residents a subscription to a new newspaper. He tore off $10 from them. By the way, now we could swim in the afternoon. The Duke at the local printing office printed an ad that Jim is a runaway slave. In case there were questions to us, we could always say that we caught Jim and were bringing him back for a fee. We swam to the next town. The Duke helped the king to learn the role of Shakespeare's Juliet. He himself was Romeo. The Duke also told the king a monologue of Hamlet, and the old man learned it. In the nearby town of the Duke hung posters. Entry, 25 cents, for children and servants, 10 cents. Only one show before the tour to Europe. Hurry up. The town was the most common. I saw one dude shoot another. And he did it in front of the daughter of the murdered. It's okay. Only then did the crowd want to lynch the one who shot, and the people went to his house. Friends, the lynch court is when the mob catches someone and hangs it right there. Without some kind of trial. That dude calmly went out with a gun. So what? Got me lynched? Well, let's. Who is first? You're all cowards. People lowered their heads and parted. And I went to a circus show. I like it. And in the evening was our presentation, or rather the Duke and the King. About 12 came. Not much. But they did not even end up. It was not interesting. Then the Duke came up with a trick. He made new posters. He wrote that there will be a performance for which women and children are not allowed. Entry, 50 cents. In the evening the hall was packed with men. A naked king ran around the stage. Rave. But the men laughed. And then the Duke said that the end of the performance. If you want to see more, come to the next performance. Men thought, what kind of garbage? Scammers. The men gathered to smash the scene and beat the actors. Suddenly one of them said that if they did that, everyone in the city would find out that they were fuckers themselves, who were easily deceived. Because you need to quietly go and praise the play. The men agreed. On the second day everything happened again. The hall was packed. The king ran naked. Oh, the end. But on the third day came all those who were on the first and second day. I saw that everyone had something in their pockets. There was a smell of rotten eggs, rotten cabbage and dead cats. The Duke understood. He went backstage and told me to run at full speed to the raft. He himself also ran. And now we are sailing along the river. The king was not even in the city. He was waiting for us on the raft. Fraudsters wildly laughed at the deceived men. For 3 days they earned $465. This is about $12,000 today. The tramps went to bed. Jim was surprised by the behavior of kings. They are all like that, Jim. And at all times, our kings are still normal. Jim was very sad for his family, almost like a white man. He thought that he would never see his wife or children again. The next scam began with the king. He dressed like a preacher and sailed with me on a boat to the steamer that sailed to the nearest town. On shore we saw a guy. We offered him to take us to the boat to sail to the ship. The guy said that in their city last night, one rich man, Peter Wilkes, died. Unfortunately, he did not wait for his brothers Garvey and William. He had never even seen William. He grew up deaf and dumb, and he was 30 to 35 years old. He did not want to write a will, but left a letter to Brother Garvey in which he indicated where his money was hidden and how to divide his property. And why didn't Garvey come? The king asked. He lives in England. He is a preacher. Maybe he did not arrive yet, maybe he did not receive the letter. The king asked the guy various details about the life and relatives of the deceased. We put the guy on the steamer, and we stayed. The king instructed me to go to the Duke, tell him to dress well and take new suitcases. I guessed what he intended. The king told the Duke everything, and then the three of us boarded the ship. By the way, at that time the steamers stopped on demand, like buses. Men stand on the shore and wave. A boat is lowered from the ship, float to the shore and take passengers. When we went ashore, the king asked the inhabitants how to find Peter Wilkes. People said he died last night. Then the king and the Duke began to sob. The Duke, by the way, became deaf and dumb. I have never seen such rogues. Very soon the whole city knew about our arrival. Everyone came to see us. 3 nieces were waiting for us at the house of Peter Wilkes. These were the daughters of another brother, who had long been dead. The girls were orphans. They rushed to their uncles' necks. The king and the Duke saw the coffin and burst into tears again. I have never in my life seen men so raw. Then the niece brought a letter to Uncle Peter. The king read it out loud. A residential building and $3,000 in gold were relied upon by girls. The tannery, other houses and $3,000 in gold were relied upon by the brothers. The money was buried in the cellar. The fraudsters went down to the cellar and dug a bag of money. They began to recount. There was a shortage of $415. They decided to report their money to exactly 6,000. Otherwise, at the top, they would not have believed that there was not enough money in the bank. Moreover, the Duke offered to give all the money to the girls. Then surely no one will suspect them. The king happily agreed. With great pathos, he gave all 6,000 nieces. Those were happy. And only one Dr. Robinson did not believe the king. He immediately said that he was not an Englishman at all, but an ordinary swindler. Then the older niece handed over 6,000 to the king, so that he himself would dispose of them at his discretion. At dinner, I almost spilled it out. One niece asked me a lot of questions about England. And she knew more about England than I did. In general, I answered as I could. But overall, the sisters were very good. I thought that we should not allow these scammers to rob them. I have to steal money from them and return them to the sisters. I went to look for money in the king's room. Suddenly I heard the king enter with the duke. So I hid behind niece's dresses. They looked under the bed. There was nobody there. And they began to talk. The duke said that he needed to run away as quickly as possible with the money he already had. Do not need orphans even more to rob. The king did not agree. He wanted to sell all the property and then hide. Moreover, he argued that girls would not suffer. As soon as it turns out that the buyers paid unreal owners, the transaction is invalidated, and the property will be returned to the orphans. They hid the money in a mat under a quilt. I saw it, and as soon as they left, I immediately took the bag. I decided to hide it somewhere at night on the street, because I was sure that the house would be checked first of all when the disappearance was discovered. At night, I waited until everyone in the house fell asleep. I went down to the living room, where the coffin with Peter Wilkes stood. I heard footsteps and hid a bag of money in a coffin. It was Mary Jane's niece. She came to pray to her uncle. I went back to my room. The money stayed in the coffin. In the morning, the undertaker came and stabbed this coffin in front of everyone. I didn't even know if there was money left in the coffin, nor maybe someone had already stolen it. I thought I would write a letter to Mary Jane later and tell her everything. And now he didn't even know if the money was in his grave. How now everything is confused. I did want the best. Peter Wilkes was buried. The scammers told their nieces that they wanted to take them to England. It is only necessary here to sell everything and then it will be possible to go to Europe. I did not know what to do. 2 days later they sold the first 3 slaves, separating the 2 brothers from their mother. This angered many residents of the city. The girls also grieved. On the morning of the auction, where Peter Wilkes' property was sold, the king and duke came to my room. They noticed the loss of money. "Did you enter my room?" the king asked. "No." "Or maybe saw someone who entered?" "Yes. The slaves you sold yesterday." "Damn it. So I knew. I told you so," said the duke. It was necessary to immediately leave. The king blamed me. Like, I did not tell him that I saw the Negroes leaving his room. I walked past Mary Jane's room. The room was open. The girl was crying. I asked what was the matter. She replied that this was due to the sale of slaves. After all, now the mother will never see her children. He will, I said. It won't be 2 weeks. So, stop. Explain. Well, I told everything, that those 2 are not uncles to her, but ordinary swindlers. Now it was necessary to arrange everything in such a way that so Jim and I were not injured. I came up with something. I sent Mary Jane from the city to her friend, like to visit. After all, if she had stayed, then with her sincere soul the fraudsters would not be able to teach a lesson. And I also gave her a note in which I wrote, where I left $6,000. Somehow the tongue did not turn to say. I saw the girl for the last time. In the evening, the auction began. Everything was sold out. And then I saw how the crowd went to the auction and laughed at the same time. It turns out that real uncle sailed on the ship. I thought the king and the duke would panic. But no. They looked at the brothers of the deceased, as if they were crooks. Uncle Garvey said that he and his brother would stay at the hotel. And when their luggage arrives, they will be able to prove that they are real relatives. William, by the way, had his right arm broken. Plus, the guy who saw the king came down from the boat when he put the guy from their city on the boat 2 days ago. The doctor, who immediately realized that the king and the duke were swindlers, suggested holding a confrontation between them and the new uncles. In the meantime, the king needs to deposit a bag with $6,000. And after clarifying all the circumstances, pass on to its rightful owners. "We don't have the money," said the king. "They were stolen by slaves. You can ask my servant." I said that I saw the Negroes leaving King's room. And that's all. I was asked if I was English. I said yes. And they all laughed. "Okay, boy, better shut up," said the doctor. "You cannot lie." Then the lawyer of the deceased took letters from Garvey. He wanted to check for handwriting. Of course the handwriting of the king did not match. And the handwriting of the present Garvey also did not coincide. This is because my handwriting is very bad. Brother William was rewriting all the letters for me. And he broke his right hand, so he cannot write now either. And then the real Garvey asked the king what tattoo was on his brother's chest. Well, I think the king is in trouble. Everyone was looking at him. "A little thin blue arrow," he replied. "No," said Garvey. "He has the letters P, B, U." The guys who dressed the body before the funeral said that they did not see any arrows or letters. Then everyone around wanted to drown in the river immediately for scammers. The lawyer calmed everyone down. "What is the problem? Now we dug the corpse and see." Everyone happily agreed. People grabbed us and pulled us to the graveyard. It was already 9 in the evening. It is a pity that Mary Jane was not in the city. So all this comedy has already ended. The crowd came to the cemetery. It was dark. There were many shovels, but nobody took the flashlight. The thunderstorm began with thunder and lightning. But people were digging with excitement. People took out the coffin, took out and removed the lid. And there is a bag of gold. Well, at that moment when everyone was looking at gold, I ran away. I ran like Tom Sawyer from the cemetery from Indian Joe. Ran to the river, got into some boat and swam to the island where Jim was waiting for us. Shouted to Jim to untie the raft. We sailed, and I was so happy. And then I saw 2 of us rowing in a boat, the king and the duke. Damn it. The king was furious. He wanted his anger out on me. But the duke reassured him. It turned out that they, just like me, fled when everyone saw the gold in the coffin. By the way, they thought each other that it was one of them who hid the gold in a coffin. And then he wanted to go back and take all the money himself. In general, the Duke grabbed the king by the neck and held tight until he confessed that he had hidden the gold. Then they drank a bottle together and became friends again. When they fell asleep, I told Jim everything who they were. We sailed down the river to the south for many days before the crooks decided again to appear in the city. They lectured about the dangers of alcohol, conducted classes in dance, in oratory, healed, wondered. But people were driving them everywhere. The money they have completely run out. They were evil. And then the crooks began to talk. Jim and I didn't like these secrets. We decided to run away from them. We went 3 together in the city. In the morning the king left, and the Duke and I came for lunch. Jim stayed on the raft. I found a moment to escape. Ran to the raft. But Jim is not. I ran, looked for him near, no Jim. I asked one boy if he had not seen a stranger there. Saw him. This is a runaway slave. He was caught and taken to the Silas Phelps farm. He was caught by some unfamiliar visiting old man. Took him only $40. And such a black man costs at least $200. I began to think how to help Jim. I was very angry at the crooks, who once rescued from the trouble. I wanted to write a letter to Miss Watson and tell where Jim is now. But I decided that if he was turned back, then Jim would be even worse. And then I myself will become an accomplice of a Negro, if I helped him escape. My heart was very bad. Perhaps this is the way the Lord God punishes me, I decided. I wrote a letter to Miss Watson, and then tore it up. I could not betray Jim. I decided to help him run again. The next day I went exploring to the house of Mr. Phelps. And on the way I met the Duke. He put up posters of his performance. The Duke admitted that Jim was sold by the king. But the king did not share the money. How did he sell it? This was my Negro. Forget it, boy. The Duke did not want me to stay in the city, because I could blurt out too much. Therefore he said that Jim is now 40 miles from this city. I said I would go look for him. And I went to the Phelps cotton plantation, to his manor. There I was immediately surrounded by dogs and started barking. The hostess ran out of the house. So this is you? You arrived. Yes, I said, not understanding what she was talking about. The woman told the children to greet her cousin Tom, with me. They have been waiting for me for 2 days. A woman asked to call her Aunt Sally. And then she said, well, Tom, now it's your turn to tell. And I do not know what to tell her. And then I was saved by her husband, who came home, Mr. Phelps. Aunt Sally told him that their nephew, Tom Sawyer, had arrived. Wow, Tom Sawyer. This is my best friend, about whom I know everything. This is a coincidence. I told him a lot of things. And then I heard the steamer. I thought, what if Tom had sailed on it? I'll go check it out. I was driving on a trolley and saw Tom driving towards me. I shouted, stop. Tom saw me. I didn't do anything bad to you. Why did you come to me from heaven? I did not die. This is all I set up. Touch me, make sure. Tom touched and hugged me for joy. I told him about all my adventures. What are we going to do now? I asked. And Tom, help me steal Jim, the Negro Miss Watson. Tom agreed. He told me to go home, and he himself would drive up in half an hour. Everything will be cool, he said. Okay. I came back, and after me half an hour later, Tom drove up. He said that his name is William Thompson, and he is looking for Mr. Nichols' estate. It was a neighbor of Phelps. Aunt Sally told Tom to stay with them for lunch. And at dinner, Tom got up and kissed Aunt Sally. She was shocked. What was it? Everything is fine. I am your nephew, Sid. Well, my aunt and uncle were happy again. They had never seen Tom or Sid before. And in the evening after dinner, Tom and I fled to the city. He told me the news of our city. And then we saw a crowd with lanterns. People shouted and dragged the king with the duke. Those were in pitching and feathers. I even felt sorry for them. People told us everything. Swindlers staged another show. And when the naked king began to jump, the crowd grabbed him. Everyone already knew that they were crooks. They were waiting for the right moment. We found out where Mr. Phelps was keeping Jim in the barn behind the house. Now it was necessary to come up with a plan to release him. I said that I needed to steal the key from Uncle, free Jim and run onto the raft. And then again I didn't know where to go. I don't want to, said Tom. Something is simple. Need something more interesting to come up with. I could not understand this. Tom was from a good family. And then helped me steal a nigger. This is a shame for him and his whole family. Something is wrong here. Tom said he needed to dig. Well, let there be a tunnel. He explained to me that niggers steal. It's too easy. We need to come up with the most difficult to make it more interesting. He even thought to cut Jim's leg off the chain. And we do not need to dig with shovels, which stood nearby, but with knives. To a little longer. That night we started digging. By knives. It was moving very slowly, and the calluses rubbed. Tom said that we need to take hose to make it faster. The next night we made a tunnel and got into the barn to Jim. He certainly did not understand why everything was complicated. But since white people have decided so, then this is probably correct. The aunt noticed that things began to disappear at home. A shirt, a spoon, candles, a sheet, a brass candlestick. We tore the sheet into small pieces and made a ladder out of it. And the ladder itself was hidden in a cake that was baked in the woods. But not the whole ladder. We cut it off. The whole ladder did not fit. Then Tom told Jim to scribble some inscriptions on the stone. Jim did not know how to write. We found a stone. It was heavy. We asked Jim to drag him to his barn. He came out of the barn and dragged this stone into the barn. Then Tom wanted Jim's barn to have spiders or a rattlesnake, or rats. Maybe not, asked Jim. It is necessary, Jim. It is necessary. All the prisoners had rats. And you will be. You still plant a flower. And water it with your tears. So I have water. And I rarely cry. Tears are necessary, Jim. So cooler. Now you will become the most famous prisoner in the district. In the morning we caught 15 rats. They carried them to Aunt Sally's bedroom. Oh, and there was a cry. We caught spiders, frogs, beetles, caterpillars, 20 snakes. We brought the bag home and left in the room. When we returned after dinner, the snake was not there. Probably the bag was badly tied. Snakes crawled around the house. Jim lived with all these creatures. 3 more weeks passed. To escape everything was ready. Tom said that now is the time to write anonymous letters. What's this? I asked. Why warn someone? That's more interesting. You, Huck, put on the dress of the maid and put the letter under the door at night. The letter was, beware. You are in danger. Be on your guard. Unknown friend. On the front door hung a picture with a skull and crossed bones. And later on the kitchen door hung a picture with a coffin. In the house everyone was really very scared. Tom was delighted. There was another letter. It said that today at midnight a gang of villains would steal a runaway Negro. In the evening, Tom and I were sent to bed early. At 23:30 Tom put on the dress of Aunt Sally, and sent me to the basement for a piece of butter. I went and met my aunt on the way back. Oil hid under the hat. She told me to go to the living room. It was fun there. 15 farmers with guns were sitting in the living room. The butter began to thaw and flowed over the forehead and temples. My aunt thought that I had an inflammation of the brain. She saw that it was butter and sent me to the bedroom. I climbed out the window, caught up with Tom. I say that everything is bad. There are many farmers in the house with guns. His eyes flashed. Cool, he answered. We snuck into Jim's barn and crawled through the tunnel. We heard farmers walking around the house. When we ran, Tom caught his leg on the fence. The men heard him and started shooting, and then the dogs were released. We ran to the river. Dogs we knew. Therefore, when they caught up with us, they wagged their tails and ran back. And we boarded the boat and sailed to the island, where our raft stood. Tom was most happy because he had a bullet in his leg. He was hurt, bleeding. Jim said that we needed to swim no further, but seek a doctor. I swam for the doctor. Jim hid in the woods. Tom stayed on the raft. I found a doctor and woke him up. I told him that my brother and I were hunting on the island, and we stayed overnight there. And in the dream brother pushed his gun, and it shot him in the leg. I thought that if Tom needed several days to recover, the doctor would let everyone out. Doctors need to kidnap. And when Tom recovers, then release. The doctor swam to Tom, and I stayed in the city. In the morning I met Uncle Silas and convinced him that everything was all right with us. We caught a Negro night. Swam. Sid will be back later. Aunt Sally was glad to see me. She was worried. They had a lot of guests in the house. They discussed Jim's escape. He is crazy, they said. Some nonsense scrawled on the stone. And why did he need a ladder of rags? Why did the stone dragged into the barn? He was probably helped by Negroes 20 or 40. Evening came. Tom was not. Aunt Sally was worried. She waited all night for her nephew, sitting by the candle. Tom was not in the morning either. Uncle Silas handed a letter from St. Petersburg to Aunt Sally. This is the town where Tom and Geck lived. Aunt Polly wrote it, Aunt Sally's sister. And suddenly we saw Tom unconscious on a stretcher. Beside to him was a doctor. Behind them, the crowd led the bound Jim in a woman's dress. It was another idea of Tom, to put Jim in Aunt Sally's dress. Some people even wanted to hang Jim. But it was impossible. After all, he was in another property. Jim was put in the same barn again. The doctor said Jim is good. If it were not for the Negro, he would not have been able to help Tom. For Jim is not a pity to pay $1,000. When Jim was asleep, people swam up to the island and grabbed him. And then everyone was taken to the Phelps home. 2 days later, Tom's fever was asleep. And he told everything to Aunt Sally. She was shocked. And when Tom knew that Jim was put back in the barn, he shouted that Jim was a free man. After all, Miss Watson, his former mistress, who died 2 months ago, released him in her will. And all these tricks with Jim's escape were just for fun. And then Aunt Polly entered the room. I realized that now it will be very bad and hid under the bed. Of course, Aunt Polly immediately told her sister who is who. That Sid is Tom, and I am Huckleberry Finn. Aunt Polly confirmed that Jim is a free man. She arrived after receiving a letter from her sister, in which she reported that Tom and Sid had safely arrived at her place. And the letters from Aunt Polly to her sister Tom were picked up at the post office and did not give to Aunt Sally. Tom's plan was this. After Jim was released from the barn, he would sail on a raft to the very mouth of the river, and then tell him that he was already free. But it did not happen. It happened differently. Jim was released. Tom, for his patience, gave him $40, which Jim was very pleased. And Jim said that my drunk father was dead and would no longer bother me. This is the corpse of my father he saw in the houseboat after the flood. Aunt Sally wanted to adopt and educate me, just like Mrs. Douglas. Well, I do not. I'd rather run into Indian territory. That's all, friends.